So my name is Lisa Schiff, and I am a technical lead at the California Digital Library of the University of California at the Office of the President. I'm a librarian, but my role is to I'm responsible for the systems behind our open access publishing programs at the CDL, and those are services that we make available to researchers associated with the University of California so that they can make their work openly available to the world. So we run an institutional repository, eScholarship, and that operates just like any other repository where researchers can make previously published materials and gray literature available. And then we also have a publishing program, and we publish open access journals, and we also make monographs available. So again, people who are affiliated with the university can start a journal, and those journals operate like any other journal. They have editorial board members from all over the world and authors contributing from everywhere. There just needs to be an initial connection with the university to start it up. And that infrastructure is all subsidized and provided for free from the perspective of UC scholars to researchers affiliated with the university. So my role is making sure that those systems operate efficiently and robustly, and that we're always looking towards new services and functionality in that publishing space that would be of use to the scholars who are publishing with us, and also to scholars who are using the work that we then make available. I also work on, our group also is responsible for implementing UC's open access policy, and all those publications that are gathered from that policy are made available in eScholarship or links to an open version of them. Right, I think there are a couple things there. The first is really helping researchers to understand what open access means. Surprisingly, there are still a lot of misconceptions that people operate under. One of the biggest of which I find really surprising, is that open access materials and open access journals do not use peer review, which is absolutely not true. Open access journals, that just basically refers to a business model. It means the material in those sources is freely available for people to read, and that somehow the cost of the production is being covered by another means other than subscription. So I think helping researchers understand that open access is not an indicator of lesser quality or some kind of substandard work or substandard scholarship. That it's about access. So that's a big thing. I think another thing is helping researchers to become aware of all the different places where you can find open access materials, making them aware of repositories that are available at their own institution out there in the world, various disciplinary repositories that are focused on certain subject areas. So for instance, PubMed. A new one that's really exciting, the Humanities Commons, that's working on making humanities scholarship openly available. There's Social Archive, which is very similar to Archive, which is the famous physics preprint repository, and that's focused on the social sciences now. Open Library of the Humanities. I mean, there are just more and more places where you can find new research that is openly available, and I think raising the profile of those sources to scholars is helpful. And then another big role for librarians is making sure that the services we're supporting are highly discoverable, or that the content in those services is highly discoverable. So making sure that we're following the rules or the best practices for getting those items indexed that were by search engines, that were getting registered in various directories, that were helping the journals that we're supporting getting included in subject indexes, all those kinds of things. Right. Well, there's a number of ways. I mean, the first thing I would say is to make sure that the service that you're providing is usable by people, that when they come to a piece of content, that they have all the indicators they need to know that this is a piece of scholarship that they want to read or that they can find out more about. The other thing is to make sure that you're following best practices that search engines want, and those are well documented all over the place. Things like using dynamic sitemaps, having good meta tags in your web pages for that content. Other strategies are having good mechanisms for making that content discoverable and usable by other systems. So having APIs or interfaces so that other programs can talk to your service. There's a standard interface, the OAI PMH interface for sharing metadata that's well known and well used within our community. Another piece that's becoming more and more important is making sure that reuse statements and licensing information is clearly available to a human being on a page, but also that it's included in the metadata so that it's machine readable. That's really important too. Other important things are using unique identifiers for your content and having persistent URLs so that citations and references are stable and content can be not only discovered, but kind of assessed and worked on by new services like various altmetric kinds of services. And that when people reference those items in a variety of ways, not just a traditional citation, but in social media, even in email, that there's something really stable and uniquely identified for that content to be attached to. I mentioned meta tags, and there's a lot of information out there about that, but that's really important and easy to do. And then there are some things that are a little bit specific to open access journals. The trick with open access journals is making sure that you're getting your journal known in all the places that it should be known. So you need to do things like getting an ISSN for your journal. That allows you to do something like get DOIs associated with the articles and have those DOIs and the associated metadata indexed in Crossref if you are working with a service like EasyID or even Crossref itself to get DOIs. Those two things are really, really helpful for making the metadata associated with the articles in your journal widely available to a lot of other services that are trying to pull in information from journals, abstract and indexing services, library-based services, all kinds of things. So those are some really important pieces. Well, those are really best practices that already exist in the scholarly communication world, in the publishing world, and they're practices that the library world, and the library publishing community in particular, is bringing into library-supported OA publishing. I think in the early days of library-based publishing, we recognized, there was a recognition that there were a lot of very smaller niche journals that needed to get going, and there wasn't as much of a focus on getting included in some of these more, traditional services that were associated with commercial publications. There's a lot of experimentation going on. I think it was early days, and it was important just to get these journals up and running. But now, we know how to do this. We know how to get these journals published. There's infrastructure around that we can use, and I think a lot of us are really trying to understand how we can help journals be better included in the places that scholars are looking to find content, or in the places that other services are looking to find content. So, I think by using these standards within our own world, or using these best practices, there's just sort of a snowball effect. The more people do it, the more other people will do it. I think we're also looking to massage some of these practices so that they're better suited to the OA and the library publishing world. So, for instance, a big change that happened a couple years ago was that Crossref is now accepting DOIs minted by other entities, and it's including those DOIs and the associated metadata in its services. So at the CDL, we have a service called EasyID, and we use that for the journals in eScholarship that want to have DOIs. And EasyID on our behalf registers all of that with Crossref, and that means that our journals participating in this have a presence in Crossref, which is great. So that's a change from the way things used to work, where you had to get your DOIs from Crossref, and it was just more expensive and more complicated. So that's an example of the library world or the ScholComm world finding different approaches to some of the to achieving some of the same end goals, and these approaches work better with some of the new publishing approaches that libraries are supporting. Really, they're exactly the same as what you would use to evaluate any other journal. And this kind of goes back to your earlier question, which is what are some of the issues, or what are some of the things that librarians can do to help scholars better use OA materials? And that is to understand that OA journals are not any different than any other journal. So you should take the same kind of criteria that you would use to evaluate any journal and bring that to an OA journal. You should not, there's nothing different to look at, except you might think about the sustainability of the journal as a project in a slightly different way. But you want to look at the same things, like what are the submission guidelines for this journal? Who's on the editorial board? What are the acceptance rates? What are the publishing rates? Does it publish incrementally, or does it have a certain number of issues every year? How unique is this journal within the field? Is it offering something really new and interesting, or is it just one more journal with a slightly different take than another couple of journals? And then you want to look at things like how are other scholars in that field using the material published by this journal. And a lot of journals in general, but especially OA journals, make available information about views and downloads of the articles. And that's a tricky metric because it's all relative. Something can have a lot of views or a lot of downloads, but if you don't really have any context for that, if you don't know relative to what, you have no way of evaluating that. But it gives you some idea. If nobody has read something, either you've discovered something wonderful or it might not be as great as you think. So I guess you have to bring some domain expertise into your assessment of any journal. But that would be true whether the journal was open access or not. So I guess I would say that bring your knowledge of your field with you when you look at any piece of scholarship, and bring that to OA works as well. So really, those are the things that you need to look at. The sustainability issue is kind of a different thing. OA journals don't have subscription funds to keep themselves going, obviously. They're funded either through organizations like the CDL, where part of our budget is slated towards eScholarship to make this system available to our scholars. So it's subsidized. Some OA journals have article processing charges or author fees. That's more common with the science fields where there are grants associated with scholarship. So those kinds of questions around sustainability are important in thinking about, how long is this journal going to be around? But you could ask that same question for a commercially published journal too. If the subscription rate is not that high, then that journal might not last too long either. So it's the same question. It's just different ingredients going into the assessment. So similar to the last question, I would say that they're the same best practices that you would bring to any other journal effort. You want to make sure that you're following the standards of scholarship in your field. You want to have guidelines and policies that are rigorous and transparent and clear. submission guidelines that really lay out what you want authors to do, review processes that really spell out what you want your reviewers to do. You want a very solid editorial board, and of course, solid editors-in-chief. I think a sustainability plan is an important one, and a succession plan. So thinking ahead of time about what you will do when the founding editors decide it's time to move on. That's not something you want to be worrying about when it happens. You want to start thinking about that ahead of time. Again, those are things that you would want any journal to focus on. Something that some OA journals might not be thinking about until later because the infrastructure is out there to get started so easily. But getting an ISSN is really, really important. And it's essential for getting your journal included in things like the Directory of Open Access Journals, and often in getting indexed in other places. It's a unique identifier for your journal, and it's an important thing to get. So those are really the basic things. Well, you cannot get an ISSN for an institutional repository, although I did see somebody debating that yesterday or today, which is an interesting idea. It's really a different beast. So institutional repositories generally span all disciplines. So you don't really have that disciplinary focus. You don't have it. What you're doing is providing a service to all the scholars within your institution. Certainly, subject-based repositories have that focus, and their PubMed is not going to take publications on poetry unless there was a crossover with the health sciences, which there is sometimes. So that's an example of that. But with institutional repositories, usually it's a different kind of selection criteria. Is there an affiliation with somebody in the institution? Is that why they're giving me the material? Is it scholarly material? So it's a little bit different. My biggest frustration is really that there are so many people operating under misconceptions about open access, which I mentioned before, but it's surprising to me that still there are people who believe that open access journals don't use peer review, or that all open access publications charge a fee for publishing, or that open access is only relevant in the sciences, and that there aren't any humanists publishing under open access models, that it's only articles and not books or other formats. None of those things are true. Peer review is used, there's rigorous scholarship, humanists are engaged in open access, as well as those in the physical sciences and health sciences. So that's a real frustration to me. I'm not sure why it continues to persist. I guess that's an opportunity for librarians to continue to talk, or to expand our conversations with researchers to make all that clearer to them. So those are really my biggest frustrations. Then the second one is that I think it would be really great if more researchers and scholars were involved in the debates around the economic challenges in the scholarly communication world right now. It's something that librarians, of course, are very involved with, because our budgets are a huge part of that mix. But we're paying for the work of scholars, and scholars, I feel, need to not only be more informed about how their work is part of this whole economic ecosystem, but to really think about how they feel about it and advocate for how they want to see that scholarly communication ecosystem sustained, and how the resources within it should be allocated. So I don't know if that's a pet peeve so much as a strong desire that I would like to see the scholars themselves have a stronger voice in that conversation. I think that librarians really need to stay on top of the issues in the open access space and make sure that they're communicating with researchers all the time about what open access really is, and clarifying whenever they spot a misconception, and in a constructive way, not in a any kind of demeaning way, but just really getting correct information out there, and also really encourage scholars to jump into that conversation, because they're really the folks that are being most affected by this, and I think it's really important that they be really engaged and squarely in the conversation.